Hello, DC fans. Today is going to be my breakdown and reaction to the Blue Beetle movie. And I'll tell you up front, I enjoyed this movie. It's not the best movie I've ever seen in the superhero genre, but it's really good. It was fun, and I highly recommend you see it at the theater. In fact, if you've already seen it once, go see it again. It needs extra support because it is not doing really well in its opening weekend. Of course, most of the DC movies coming out recently are not doing well in the theaters, but this one deserves to do well. So go see it, and if nothing else, make sure to check it out on Max. All right, so this video will have spoilers for the movie, just letting you know that up front, but assuming you're fine with that or you've seen the movie already, then let's dive right in and see what we can find out. All right, so all during the month of August, I'm running a contest, and all you have to do to enter is be a subscriber and leave a comment. The more videos you leave a comment on, the more entries you have, and then in early September, I'll announce a winner who will get to choose from one of these 3 books. Now, I understand as a DC fan, you might be like, I don't really want any of those 3 books. That's fine. If you happen to be the lucky winner, I'll let you pick something around the relative price range that's DC related. So it's all good. So leave a comment, make sure you're a subscriber, and best of luck. Okay, so what about this movie? So during the opening credits, we get a history of the Scarab's journey to Earth. And I will admit, I was looking down, taking notes, and I didn't see what I'm hearing a lot of other people say, which is there were multiple colored Scarabs in the opening credits. If you saw that, let me know how many you saw. I believe there was at least the blue one, obviously, but also a yellow, a green, and a purple. But let me know if you saw that as well. Also, and I'll get to the colored Scarabs a little more in a moment, but also we see that the blue Scarab appeared to have been damaged on its journey to Earth. And that's important because that may well be the explanation for why it lost contact with its creators. So who are its creators? Because the movie doesn't tell us. Well, if we look to the comics, we may get an idea. In the comics, the Scarab was created by the Reach, which is an alien civilization. Their empire came into existence many thousands of years ago, and they created powerful devices called, you guessed it, Scarabs. They're techno-organic exoskeletons that bonded with their users, granting them access to powerful weapons, like we see in the movie, but also preparing for an attack on the unsuspecting host planet. Yes, the Reach have definitely bad intentions in mind. So, wow, that will be fascinating if that's the direction they go, like maybe in the next appearance in another movie or in another series of Blue Beetle. So at one point, or at some point, one of these Scarabs obviously ended up on Earth, the blue one, and lost contact with the Reach, the central directives. So that's kind of what we see in the movie, right? Very interesting. A lot of direction they could go if they decide to bring in the Reach. Okay, I mentioned the multicolored Scarabs. Well, why did I mention that? Well, because in the comics, there are multiple colored beetles. Yellow beetle, green beetle, I believe a purple beetle, and the very ominous black beetle. Many of these were not friends of Blue Beetle. In fact, were enemy combatants with him, and then eventually did end up helping him in some cases. But yeah, again, lots more cool ways they can take things if they decide to bring in other beetles in the future. All right. So what else do we learn from the opening credits? Well, we see that the Scarab seems to have attached itself to many hosts over the years. Here we see one from years and years ago, clearly prehistoric times. Or not prehistoric, but ancient times, I should say. And you can see that the Scarab is attached to the host's back, and they're wielding blue powers and the blue eyes there. So very interesting. What else do we see? Well, we see a reference to Garrett, who is presumably Dan Garrett, and that he receives research funding from Ted Cord. So who is this mysterious Dan Garrett? Well, again, if we turn to the comics, all the way back in 1939, over 80 years ago, he first appeared. So this version of Dan Garrett was the first Blue Beetle, and he was a rookie cop whose father had been an officer killed in the line of duty. Now, he fought crime in a bulletproof costume, but without the benefit of powers. So he was just a dude in a costume fighting crime. Then, in 1964, a Silver Age version of the character was introduced, and he is an archaeologist who got powers from a mysterious scarab, what a shock, found on a dig. These two versions have been blended together through various retcons in the comics. And then, by the way, with the power of the scarab, this Garrett, this version of the Blue Beetle, had increased speed, strength, toughness, the ability to fly, and shoot energy blasts. So pretty much everything, right? And seemingly, they referenced this version of the Blue Beetle because we see his costume in Ted Kord's lair, his hideout. Other than the boots don't match, so I'm sure there must have been a version where he went with the red boots. But yeah, that's clearly the Dan Garrett version of the Blue Beetle. And again, in the comics, he seemed to have been an archaeologist. That fits well with what we saw in the movie. All right, we also see references to Ted Kord. I love all this lore that they stuck in just short opening credits, right? Ted Kord and his version of the Blue Beetle, we see there with the ship. That's his ship that we see later in the movie. And he's fighting someone named Fire Fist. We'll come back to Fire Fist in a moment. But so who is this Ted Kord? Well, we do learn a bit more about him in the comics because we meet Victoria and Jenny Kord. Or in the movie, I mean. We meet Victoria and Jenny Kord. But what do the comics tell us? Well, in the comics, Ted Kord was the second Blue Beetle. Okay, so he was created in 1966 by Steve Ditko. In fact, you look at that artwork there, that is definitely Ditko. Very cool. For Charlton Comics. He was a wealthy inventor, an Olympic-level athlete, and he fought crime without the powers of the Scarab. Later stories would establish him as having a connection with Garrett, the first Blue Beetle, who had been his professor and mentor in college. And that seems to be the way the movie was going as well. Then in 1986, he appeared in DC Comics when they bought Charlton, and he was in his own comics line. And yes, in that first issue, he fought, you guessed it, Fire Fist. So that's kind of a cool little reference. And then he often appeared with Booster Gold. In fact, the two were pretty much inseparable, hanging out together. And we see also his costume there in Ted Kord's lair. And of course, that makes sense because he is Ted Kord, right? That was his version of the Blue Beetle. All right, so what happened to him? Well, it certainly implies in the movie that he vanished sometime in the 1990s. I say that because they've been searching for the Scarab. Victoria Kord has been searching, I believe it was for 15 years, if I recall correctly. So, Ted Kord vanished sometime before that, obviously. And it sure looks like he hid the Scarab away because he didn't want them to find it. So you have to wonder, was that because he discovered the connection with the Reach, that there was, ominous motivations behind the Scarab? Very interesting. We'll see if they pick up on that or not as they go forward with Blue Beetle's appearances. Okay, so now once Victoria found it, she is basically researching it and trying to tap into its power. Okay, then Jenny Kord, Ted's daughter, realizes that Victoria's up to no good, grabs the Scarab, and of course gives it to Jaime. So who is this Jaime Reyes? Well, if we turn to the comics once again, he is the third character to assume the mantle of the Blue Beetle. But he is very, very different from his predecessors. Jaime was able to unlock the secrets of the Scarab, because instead of simply granting him powers like it did with Dan Garrett, it became a full-on living suit of biomechanical armor that fused with his spine. Now that's in the comics, but obviously that is exactly what happened in the movies. So he then ends up forming a relationship with Booster Gold. What a surprise. So just like the Ted Kord one did. And he ends up being inducted into the Teen Titans and the Justice League. And of course, here he is in his costume, his outfit from the movie. So yeah, they very much adapted his story right out of the comics. So very, very cool. Okay, so we do get to see, as I alluded to, the Scarab attaching itself to him. And I'll be honest, this was a horrifying scene. That's fine with me. I love horror movies, so I loved it. But I can imagine there were some young kids whose parents took them to this movie who had some nightmares after this. I mean, it's grafted to his spine. Yikes, that has to hurt, right? And if it doesn't hurt, it's still just nasty. So one of the other things we do learn, the uncomfortable thing we learn, is that he pretty much loses all his clothing when he transforms into the Blue Beetle. So therefore, when he transforms back to him again, he's naked. And they basically did that in the comics as well. And notice this dude's like, I'm going to hurl. So it was like a horrifying transformation. But yeah, so multiple times throughout the movie, he ends up being butt naked. And the most uncomfortable time is with his whole family standing there staring at him. Now, I don't know where they were going with this, because in a normal universe, your mom and your sister are going to turn away in embarrassment and not stare at you. No, in the movie, the mom and the sister talk about his nether regions in graphic detail to the point where I was even uncomfortable. So I'm sure young kids at this time were cracking up. They thought that was hilarious. But oh my, oh my, yeah. I don't think they needed to go there, but whatever, they did. But yeah, all right. So I am wondering if he's ever going to figure out a solution to this, though. I don't know in the comics what his solution was, but I mean, it's not like he can be the Hulk and put on underwear, or purple underwear, because it burns everything off. And otherwise, it's going to be he'll be wearing the underwear on the outside of his suit. So let me know in the comments how he solves this. I honestly don't know. I don't know. I just hope he does, because I hope he's not naked the next time he appears. All right. Anyway, enough of that. But his suit was very, very cool. It was a lot of fun to see him. Basically, it was like nanotech on steroids, because he could basically do anything he could think of. But I will say the limitless possibilities could become an issue in the future. I mean, at least with like Iron Man's nanotech, he had to practice. He had to think what he was going to do. It wasn't just like had to form it over time and figure it out. In this case, whatever he thinks of, he can create. So I guess that could become a problem. I kind of hope maybe the AI behind the Scarab starts to fight him on stuff. Like he says, I want a sword, and it goes, no, I really think you need this instead. I mean, there's so many possibilities there instead of him just whipping out, whatever he can think of. So anyway, it was not an issue in the movie. I didn't find it distracting, but I do think it's something they might need to consider for his future appearances. All right, so I love the fact that his family plays a big role in the movie. The fact that they learn his identity right off the bat, from the very beginning, is great. So that means they're all able to be with him in his adventures all the way through. I will say, though, oh my goodness, his father's death was tragic. I mean, the way it played out with Jaime being ripped away, not even able to be at his side as he passed away, his sister screaming. I mean, this movie went to some very dark places, and I'm fine with that. I really am. Again, I wonder if young kids, how they reacted to all this, but wow, that was something else. While I thought his death, though, was very well handled, I don't know what to think about this scene. The fact that he kind of saw his dad in the afterlife, and his dad said, hey, it's not your time yet. You need to go back. You got more to do. It felt strangely familiar. For example, it reminded me a lot about Rocket and his near-death experience in Guardians of the Galaxy. But then Rocket's experience was strangely familiar because it reminded me of Deadpool 2's near-death experience, where he basically was with Vanessa, and she said, it's not your time. So, I mean, it's very powerful to have this happen in a movie. Very powerful. I mean, you could even argue it happened in Black Panther, I guess, to some regard, right? When he went to go see in the ancestral plane, but not as much as these. These three were really similar, but even Black Panther falls into this. So we need to not keep doing this, but I will still say it was very powerful in the movie, very emotional, and I enjoyed it a great deal. All right. I also like the fact that this family got to use Cord's ship. That was awesome. They basically just decimated everyone in their path. And again, talking about a little horrifying, but I loved it, is when the Beetle ship basically moved to having legs and was just walking across the ground, and it basically impales one of the assailants trying to attack him, impales him on its foot, and then it can't get it off. It can't get the dude off. It's shaking his foot, trying to get him off. I was like, oh, that is so gross. I love it, right? But again, little kids going, oh, mommy, that's scary. The only thing I didn't really like is it kind of seemed like once the parents and family got out of the ship, they still were in no real danger. I never feared for any of them because they ended up killing everybody in their path. Okay, case in point. I loved the grandma's role. It was awesome. And then it became silly. Why do I mean it was awesome? I thought it was awesome that she had a revolutionary past, and therefore she knew where to attack the fortress, how to go in under their defenses. It was awesome. She was like a master strategist out of nowhere. That was brilliant. That made sense. But when she picked up the big gun and then started using it and there was no recoil, she wasn't bothered by it at all, at her age, it would have knocked her on her butt. And I don't know why they didn't do that. It would have been kind of funny for her to like shoot down about 6 people and then fall on her butt in the process. So I don't know. It just felt a little cartoonish before it was over, but still, I loved her having a revolutionary past and helping. But yeah, everybody basically seemed like they were in no danger. That was a little weird. But on the other hand, how often do you get your family to come and break you out of your captivity by the arch villain? So it was good. I don't mean to raise complaints. Again, I loved the movie. So, all right. I say that because I am going to raise another complaint. I felt like the villains were They weren't terrible. I like Susan Sarandon. She was great. And Carapax was great. But they kind of felt like ripoffs a little bit from Iron Man and Ant-Man. You know, you had the CEO taking over the company and trying to kill off everybody else. You had an Ant-Man, Yellow Jacket using the costume against Ant-Man's costume. It just felt like there were elements that were rehashed a little bit, thus making the villains not that interesting. But still, Carapax, who we see in the comics as Indestructible Man, he was cool. And then when he got downloaded the knowledge from the Scarab, he kind of became this OMAC, One-Man Army Corps / Brother Eye combination. So he was several Blue Beetle villains wrapped into one. And well done. I enjoyed the final battle. It was epic. And I really liked his backstory where he, had been taken by Victoria Cord and basically used all this time. And then when he realizes it, he wants his revenge. Which, speaking of, was once again horrifying and shocking when he basically grabs her and walks into the fire and kills himself and her. I loved it. But man, I'm telling you that not for young kids. Just don't bring young kids to this. They're gonna be blown away. But yeah, wow, that was intense. Now I guess it's possible that they say that they didn't really die and they come back, but I don't think so. I think at least Victoria's gone, but probably Carapax is as well. So anyway, it was fun. It was a good battle. It was nothing special. They weren't great villains, but they weren't terrible. It kind of reminded me of like the Phase 1 part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where, it's just an origin story and you're establishing the character. The villain isn't meant to be that great because it's really more about the character, and you're building the lore. It did all of that, and it did it very, very well. Okay, so what else did the movie do? Well, it had a lot of Easter eggs to the greater DC. Now, was it the DCU or the DCEU? They intentionally left that mysterious. So I show this image. Just notice to the left of Cord Industries, what do you see? Lexco. That's a nice little Superman reference, right? And then also over to the right from there, you see Ace Chemicals. That's a Batman reference. But what was so brilliant was they didn't tell you, was this Cavill's Superman? Was it Affleck's Batman? Or was it the new Batman and Superman? Very well done. And they even mentioned Flash at one point. Is it Ezra Miller or is it whoever is going to be the new one in DCU? They just didn't say, and I really appreciate that. So it made Blue Beetle feel like he was in an already existing world around these other heroes, but yet it was still mysterious as to which versions. Very well done. They also had some other ties. Big Belly Burger has appeared in many, many DC properties. Remember, this is where the Scarab was hidden when it was handed to him. Well, Big Belly Burger has shown up, especially in the Arrowverse, many, many times. So that was kind of fun. Kind of a little Easter egg hint towards that universe. Then we also had Galaxy Broadcasting System, GBS News. That has appeared in many DC properties. We've seen GBS, you can see in the lower left-hand corner, in the Shazam movies. We've seen GBS in a Suicide Squad. And we've seen it in Aquaman, as well as other places. And of course, I got to call out Jimmy Woo, baby. That's Jimmy Woo. Love me some Jimmy Woo. Anyway, that's really cool. Once again, by putting in a Galaxy Broadcasting System GBS in the movie, you make it feel like it's part of this bigger universe. Very, very cool. All right, so let's talk about the 2 post-credit scenes. The second one I'll talk about first. It was just kind of a funny little thing. Brought in, I'm going to say it wrong, I'm sure, but El Chapulín, Colorado. But anyway, he is a very famous Mexican I'm going to say superhero, even though he didn't really do much. When he showed up, he normally caused more problems than he helped. But from the 70s, so anyone that grew up watching Mexican television would have known who this was. Obviously, I didn't know who he was, but I could tell that it was a fun little wink and a nod to those with especially a Hispanic heritage. So very, very cool. Love that. And of course, you hear a little line from George Lopez at the very end, kind of tying it all in with the movie. So I love it. Love it. All right. Post-credit scene number 1, however, definitely set up some stuff for the future because we learned that Ted Kord is not dead. They didn't really know his fate in the movie. They made it sound like he was dead, but now we find out he's alive as we hear his voice coming over the radio. And by the way, I did include this shot on the right of this costume. That kind of seems to be like that would be Jenny Kord's maybe costume if she were to wear a superhero costume. That's kind of cool. But anyway, so what does this mean for the future? Is he coming back? Well, this is kind of interesting. There was a portrait, a painting in the movie, kind of a blink and a miss it thing. And there was rumors that Jason Sudeikis was going to play Ted Kord. That'd be great if he did. And that kind of looks like him there. But nonetheless, it does sound like some actor is going to play Ted Kord in the future. So where might we see Ted Kord and Jaime Reyes reappear? Well, what did the director have to say? Well, if we read his paragraph down there at the bottom, he says, I think that's the beauty of it, right? I think it's pretty vague. We know Batman exists, we know Flash exists, we know Superman exists, but we don't say how, where, or what. And again, that's what I mentioned earlier. They intentionally didn't say which versions. He said, I think it opens up the doors to any interpretation or direction James Gunn wants to go. And because it's setting Jaime Reyes up, what happens now moving forward is game. I think that's why they decided Jaime can be the first superhero of the new DCU, because he is his own hero. And why does he say that, the first superhero of the DCU? Well, because Gunn said it. Gunn had a quote, which you can see at the bottom, where he says, the first DCU character for sure is Blue Beetle. And the first DCU movie is Superman Legacy. Okay, well, it sounds like Gunn really wants to use Blue Beetle. And I can see why. Like we've been saying in this breakdown, so many possibilities to go with this character and his cast. Okay, also it's really cool that Gunn showed up at a screening and posted on Instagram and said, I'm at the screening with my partner, Peter Safran, and I can't wait for audiences to meet Jaime Reyes, who will be an amazing part of the DCU going forward. So there he is saying it again. He's going to be a big part going forward. Love it, love it, love it. Okay, so where might we see Blue Beetle again? We remember a while back, James Gunn laid out his slate. And of course, Blue Beetle wasn't called out in that slate. But Booster Gold was called out. And of course, Booster Gold, as we've seen through many iterations, has been great friends with Blue Beetle. So my guess is we will see Blue Beetle appear in the TV live-action Booster Gold show. But which version? That's what's interesting. I mean, it wouldn't make sense to have both show up, or would it? I don't know. Maybe it would. I kind of feel like they're going to bring in Ted Kord, because if Jason Sudeikis actually was playing Blue Beetle, and let's say there's been rumors Chris Pratt might play Booster Gold, oh my gosh, those two together would be hysterical. I hope they don't end up sidelining Jaime Reyes, though. So anyway, let me know what you think. A, will this be the next appearance of Blue Beetle in Booster Gold's show? B, will we see both Ted and Jaime, or just one or the other? Very interesting. And the only reason, again, I'm a little worried is there's so many images of Booster and Ted Kord's Blue Beetle hanging out. And, of course, Booster Gold is a time traveler, so he might have even gone back and, found Ted Kord in an earlier time frame. Who knows? Which, by the way, I haven't mentioned it up to this point, but let's talk about this for just a second. When does Blue Beetle take place in the timeline? I have no clue. If anybody watching this wants to leave a comment and tell me where you think it takes place, I'd love to know. They intentionally don't give us any timeline clues, other than it's probably not during the dead of winter. That much we can guess. Beyond that, I don't know. I don't know what year. There's no clues for the year. Unless I missed it on maybe a phone or on a computer. So I think that was intentional, and you know what? I'm fine with that. I will do another timeline video update for the DCEU when the Flash shows up on Max, which will be next week. So look for that coming out. But I'll see. I keep surfing the web to see if anybody has any idea when this thing takes place in the timeline. I don't think we know. So anyway, there you go. That is my Blue Beetle breakdown and review. Remember, I mentioned there's a contest, so be a subscriber, leave a comment, and you can enter. And also, as I mentioned, every time I do a video, we do have a Discord server where we talk about everything under the sun, including DCU. And notice here we are talking about the Blue Beetle movie. And you can see, people said, it's such a fun movie to watch, probably the best DC movie since Gunn's Suicide Squad. That is very high praise, very high praise. Oh, also, I will leave a pinned comment that has an invite to the server if you want to join. And if you don't mind, like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. You can check out more content, and we'll all continue to enjoy the ever-expanding, ever-growing DC universe.